I call this meeting to order. Roll call, please. Mrs. Clark.
Trustee Bertelson.
Excused.
Trustee Black.
Here.
Trustee D.
Here.
Trustee Lucine.
Here.
Trustee Moran.
Here.
Trustee Neal.
Here.
Trustee Reinhardt.
Here.
Trustee Wilson.
I don't hear.
Okay.
Here.
Please stand for the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Welcome to the August 19th Bozeman School District School Board meeting. Thank you for joining us. Public comment will be taken throughout the meeting on agenda and non-agenda items. During public comment, no member of the public will be allowed to comment on contested cases, other adjudicative proceedings, or personnel matters. The public portions of this board meeting are being recorded in accordance with District Policy 1420 and Section 2-3-214 MCA. By remaining in this meeting, all participants and attendees acknowledge they may appear on the recording, which will be placed on the school district's website for a minimum of 1 year from today. Further instructions about participating will be provided throughout the meeting. Before we engage in the business of the board, I would like to share with all the core purpose of the Bozeman School District, which can be found on the back of our nameplates. It reads, Bozeman Public Schools exist to ensure high-level learning for all students. We will now move into agenda item 2.2, board education.
All right, good evening, trustees. I'm going to try to get my slides to show up here. Do I do something else, V? She's on it. There we go. All right, just a couple brief slides for you tonight to talk a little bit about teacher pay, all employee pay, actually for that matter, and just how structures work and amounts that you might not be aware of that contribute to our costs. So this is a slide that we pulled from our presentation a couple weeks ago when we met in July. Just average teacher pay by district. We talked at that time about Anderson and Montfort, and I tonight just want to talk about Bozeman Elementary. Average teacher pay for our district, as you recall, for 2023-24 last year, $69,392. There's some additional costs associated with that over and above those that we'd like to go through with you, both in amounts and then also talk about funding sources. So we've got in the upper left-hand corner, we've got the average teacher salary just pulled forward from that prior slide, $69,392. You'll see that's in the general fund column. That's a district cost, obviously. The rest of the slide is other district costs associated with that same teacher that don't necessarily appear on that average compensation number. Included in that are health plan. I just took an average of $12,600 per year, I believe, for some kind of, I kind of made that number up, candidly. It's a mixture, it's kind of an amalgamation of family plan and coverages and those types of things. Family dental plan, it costs $300 a month. The district has a $50,000 life insurance for every teacher. That's $69 a month. Workers' compensation insurance for teachers is a percentage of their salary, $350 a month in that example. Total amount that's paid by our general fund for that $69,000 teacher is actually $82,000. And then if you're in business for yourself or work for another company, you know that there's other costs associated with it on top of that. Those include Social Security and Medicare. FICA is what they're commonly referred to. The total of those is 7.65% of that $69,000 number. TRS is $6,571. We'll talk a little bit more about TRS here in just a second. And then unemployment insurance, $222. Those costs in that second column are funded from our retirement fund. Now those are, Lacey will mention our retirement fund budget here in a second. Those are interesting funds in that we have an unlimited permissive levy for those specific purposes. And if you look up here, you'll see all those costs are just percentages of salaries. They're employer costs associated with salaries. We have an unlimited funding source for those particular purposes. So while we don't necessarily often talk about those numbers because they don't put a pinch on our general fund, they are real. And then on the far right-hand side is the total of all those columns, $94,812 for this example of this average teacher. So when we talk about an average teacher cost, $69,000, there's actually 36% more costs on top of that to bring us to our total compensation amount, $94,812. This is for folks who are paid out of the general fund or transportation fund. Any local fund is structured in this way. If you have someone who's paid out of a federal grant, think of Title I or IDEA, all of those costs, both in those two middle columns, have to be borne by the grant. You can't access the retirement fund for folks paid out of the federal sources. So the entire, if this was a grant-paid person, the grant would have to pay the full $94,812. Okay, just one more quick slide. Sorry, Kevin.
I have a question, Mike. You said, so the 300, the 69, and the 350, you mentioned that those are per month.
Per year, sorry.
No, those are per year.
Yeah,
Okay.
per year.
All right.
Sorry.
Thank
You for clarifying that. I was talking, I wasn't listening.
All right, then, yeah. I was trying to listen.
When we do, and I bring this up, when we do head math for budget purposes, we talk about adding a teacher or adding a program, we roughly round this $82,000 number to $80,000 for head math purposes when we talk about just generally adding FTE. Not every teacher takes health insurance. They take different levels of health insurance. They take different levels of benefits. So we round that $82,000 number to $80,000. That's the general fund portion, obviously the portion that we don't have an unlimited funding source for. So when you hear us talk about it, $80,000, that's the rough math to get there. I just wanted to mention briefly these retirement system contributions going back here.
Mr. Waterman,
Yes.
sorry, Tanya.
Sorry, I have a
No,
question
great.
too.
Yeah.
Frequently, somebody will ask me what what an average teacher in Bozeman makes.
Yeah.
So is the answer 70 because that's the average teacher's salary? Or is a more accurate answer 80 because of the other things that we include in it?
I think that's a great question. I think it just depends on the context of the conversation. $69,000, $70,000 is salary. All benefits, general fund impact is that $80,000 to $80,000
So
number.
I have to remember two numbers in
Yeah,
order
just
to
whichever.
accurately
Just
answer.
if you want full compensation, then what the teacher actually sees and benefits from that 82,711 is probably the best number.
Okay, thank you.
Other questions?
Good, thank you.
Just that TRS number, there's a district contribution towards teachers' retirement system. There's a similar structure for public employer retirement, public employee retirement system. There's two systems at the state level for public employment retirement. Teachers covers obviously teachers, administrators, anyone with a teaching certificate. Public employees cover everyone else, your custodians, your food service, myself, Lacey, the folks who aren't on the teacher's side of the structure. There's an employee contribution and an employer contribution. Those numbers total in the 17% of total salary range for our staff. Just that the bottom row is the contributions that we just shared. That 6571 is pulled forward from that previous slide for someone with average teacher compensation. What you don't see is that there's also that deduction that the employee has to pay as well, and that's significant. Public positions have always been, I think, advertised as being benefit rich, and certainly retirement is one of those sources and one of those contributions, one of the benefits that the public provides to us. It used to, I think, be more of a benefit, in my personal opinion, than maybe it is now. We've had several employees come to us, especially custodians, surprised that they're going to have 7.9% of their paycheck deducted for a retirement contribution. That's a big deal. You think about all just other businesses and the matches that they make towards retirement. It's usually some kind of 50-50 match, like the employer will pay up, match up to 3% or 5% or something along those lines. Well, for PERS, it's a 7.9% deduction. And obviously there's a rich contribution on the other side of that for the employees. But when you're talking about folks who are trying to make rent payments and living paycheck to paycheck, that can be a little bit of a discouragement to that. So we've talked in the past about whether these retirement system benefits are really truly benefits to our employees, if they really help us with recruiting and retention. I would say, in my opinion, one guy talking, less and less so. It's obviously a great benefit once you get in the system and have been around for a long time, but especially for folks who are hourly, this might be more of a detriment to joining PERS than joining it. We've talked a little bit about it would take legislation to change that if that was something we wanted to do. However, part of the way TRS and PERS fund their structural shortfalls is through forfeitures, people who don't stay in the system long enough to get vested. So if there was a change to either side of this, TRS or PERS, that would be a funding source that's taken away from TRS, from those retirement systems. TRS's deficit, 30-year deficit, I believe, is $1.9 billion statewide, based on a whole ton of assumptions on what their assets are going to earn over those 30 years. And our portion of that liability is $68 million. The portion that's assigned to the Bozeman School District is $68 million. It's the second largest liability that we've got on our financial statement. So it's, I bring this up to you just because we're going through it and we hadn't really talked about it, but I'm not sure that those benefits that were designed to attract and retain employees are really doing that well at this point in time. I'll shut up. That's all I had. Happy to answer questions.
Yeah, thanks, Mike. Just to clarify, is these percentages are mandated, correct?
Yes.
And is that because it's a defined benefit program?
So both programs, TRS and PERS, were traditionally defined benefit programs. So you pay in, and whatever you pay in, the state would guarantee you when you retire a certain amount of compensation every month based on how much your average final compensation were at those times. That's still an option. There's annual increases once you get to the retirement age that have been reduced over time, and both systems also now have a defined contribution component to them. So you can choose when you start employment if you want the traditional defined benefit plan, or if you just want to contribute as much as, have the employee contribution and employer contribution go into investments that you direct, and then you're welcome to walk away from the system at any point in time and take your earnings when you go, similar to what you're probably going to see in private industry.
So if an individual elected to be out of the defined benefit and do the defined contribution
Yes.
part, then they would not have the 7.9%.
No, it's
taken out
still
of
still
it.
required.
They would have,
You still
It's still required?
It's still required. Yep.
even under defined contribution?
Yes, it's still required. And you have to make that election at higher date. You can't make it 6 months into the road and down the road, or 20 years down the road. You have to make a decision, defined contribution, defined benefit when you start. Those contributions from the employee and employer start are both required, regardless of which one you choose.
So what's the feeling of you guys or teachers about that? Is there any concerns about that, or?
I do. I think, from my perspective, again, as a recruitment and retention tool, which is what we're struggling with, and I think it's, in my personal opinion, it's less of an issue on the teacher side than it is on the public employee side, custodians, food service, those types of folks who don't know that this is coming and may or may not be in it for a long haul. If you get someone who comes out of college with a teaching degree, chances are better that they're committed to this profession and going to stay with it till retirement. It's it's more of an incentive for them than it is for someone who could be a custodian here or at that new condo or at the gym or whatever you might have. We've talked about it. There's just at the last legislative session, the idea bubbled up. It met pretty significant resistance from the teachers union when we talked about it due to the benefit. And you also don't want to discourage people from making good long-term investment decisions and preparing themselves financially for retirement. That's not what this is about. It's just a matter of whether we can get people in the door because of it in the first place. Do you have something you want to add? That was it. It was just informational more than anything.
Any further trustee questions? Thanks, Mike. Up next, consent agenda.
Could I ask that we pull 3.2 and place it at the end of the agenda to make an addition?
Request to pull item 3.2.1 out of consent and add under action items later in the meeting. Is everyone agreeable with that? Thank you. Now we can take a motion for consent.
I would make a motion to approve items or all items in 3.4.
Second.
Motion made by trustee Black, seconded by trustee Wilson. Is there any public comment? Seeing none, all in favor? Motion passes 7-0. Next, item 4.2.1, action item singular, consider approval of 2024-25 high school district budget.
All right, good evening, trustees. I know these are listed as two separate items on the agenda, but as they go hand in hand, I'll present them together, and then you'll have to make two separate motions if you choose to approve them. So today, we are talking about the final budget. If I can get this to work. I'm good? Click. No,
Are you extended or you're?
I pushed the slideshow presenter. If I do it there.
Computer is frozen. So you go out of it and go back into it.
Sorry,
Actually, why don't you?
just unplug.
Give that, we're already slide like that.
Fastest budget presentation ever. One slide.
Let me just do this. All right, there we go. So the purpose of this meeting is to establish our 2024-25 spending authority for our budgeted funds. We're going to recommend setting tax levy dollar amounts. And then my ultimate goal is to help everyone understand Gallatin County's taxable value decrease, which is an anomaly and doesn't typically happen, and what that means and what some of our next steps are. So we're going to start right in with just the proposed adopted budget for the upcoming fiscal year. Here's the elementary budget adoption. A couple items I just want to bring your attention to. The largest increase that we have on the budget for this year is the $1.1 million in the general fund. This was, of course, the due to inflation, 3% inflation that was approved by the government. We have a flat line in enrollment, so this does not take into account any additional A and B. But with the 3% inflationary increase, we are able to levy 80% of that amount permissively, and then our voters approved the $250,000 general fund levy in the May election. So that's our largest increase in budgeted funds this year. Our largest decrease in budgeted funds this year, you'll notice, is the technology budget. We're starting the year with $875,000. A couple reasons for that in the elementary. The biggest and most important reason is our levy in the elementary technology was approved by taxpayers for 3 mills. So depending what our taxable value is, we get basically that times 3. When we don't have enough equipment and things to justify levying that full amount, we cannot levy the full amount. So we're not going to be able to levy the full 3 mills this year. Right now, we're calculating a 1.98 mills, which is right about $700,000, a little bit less. In addition, we had less fund balance reappropriated. So that means that our balance at the end of fiscal year '24 is lower, and that's what's rolling into this year, and that's decreasing that budget by $651,000. In the high school, the overall budget increase is sitting at 7%. The largest decrease here, as well as in the technology, that's once again due to the value of a mill decreasing. Voters approved a 1 mill technology levy, so we can levy a mill's worth, and with the decrease of taxable value, that amount went down. And then also for this one, we have less of a fund balance rolling over, and those are largely due just to some large expenses that we incurred this last year in the technology fund. The largest increase, once again, is the general fund. That's due to the 3% inflation, but in the high school, it's also due to the additional A and B. We see enrollment growing. And then we also are getting a basic entitlement for the Bridger Charter Academy this year. Another noteworthy fund that I wanted to bring your attention to is the building reserve. You can see that that budget increased by $1.5 million for this upcoming year. We're still levying basically the same amounts as last year. We just haven't had any substantially large building projects. So we had a larger fund balance roll over from fiscal year '24 into fiscal year '25. So that's why that budget increased a little bit. So this is just a side-by-side of the elementary and the high school. So you can see the total spending authority for all of the budgeted funds. The elementary is going to be in the dark blue, and then the high school's the tan. Overall, between all of these funds, we're looking at a $122 million budget. Yeah.
Thanks, Lacey. Just for clarification on the technology budgets, does the amount we're budgeting covers what is needed for the year in technology? So
Elementary is hard. We passed the levy for elementary prior to 2013. There's state law that says if a levy is passed prior to 2013, it can be permanent. However, there's a mathematical equation that's based on 7 years of expenses, and it has to be used on things like computers and laptops and mice. It can't be used on things like network and security, which we spend a lot of money on. So that's money that's still coming out of the funds, but we can't levy that amount for it. So that's the big issue with the elementary. We just had some larger expenses that don't happen every year occur in 2024. So we don't anticipate the spend to be as high for this upcoming year. Oh, what did I do? Okay. Sorry, I have to take a drink. So, of the $122 million budget, these are the different funding sources, excuse me, for where that money is coming from. So we are having $19.7 million, which is the very light tan, reappropriated from last year. That's money that rolls over from one year into the next. Our county revenue is in red, and that's going to be $9.7 million. That's some of our transportation money and then retirement fund money. The state revenue, the $36 million in the dark tan, is 30%, and that accounts for the general fund base. And then the local sources, the local property tax, are the majority of where the funding comes from. At 46%, local property taxes account for $56 million of our overall $122 million budget. So if we take the local property taxes and we break it down into the different funding sources, you'll see that the light blue is what the Board of Trustees approves. So this is the amount of money that you opt to tax our property owners with permissive levies. So they don't actually get to decide if we should tax that or not. That's up to you guys in this room. That's $5.8 million for this year. That's 10% of the overall property taxes. So when you're looking at the overall picture, it's smaller compared to these other two sources. The second largest is the permissive taxes mandated by state law. That's our general fund. So state law requires that we levy 80% in order to fund our schools. Part of that comes from these permissive taxes. And then the 65% is the dark blue, and that's actually voter-approved taxes. So when we're looking at the overall big picture of who approves and taxes these dollar amounts, our voters have had a very large say in how much money they're willing to contribute to the district and to local public schools. And then with that being said, we keep track of how much money we levy versus how much money we actually get in the door for cash on hand. So when you look at these percentages, this is the percentage of what we levy versus what actually comes in. Typically, we're in the 99 to 100% range of taxes collected. This year, it doesn't look like a big difference. We collected 97.92% of the actual amounts that we tried to levy. That doesn't sound like a lot, but it actually results in $1.15 million. So that's a small percentage difference that results in a large amount of money that we have not received, that we put in the budget for last year to levy, largely in part due to the huge taxable value that went out last year and the protested taxes. People are still working on those, and it's a big chunk of money.
Yeah, thanks. Could you explain to us just a little bit the protest part of this thing on what that process is?
So protested is when somebody disagrees with the taxable value that they were assessed. So every other year is a reappraisal year. Last year was a reappraisal year and taxes skyrocketed. The taxable values went up roughly about 55%. Property owners have the ability to basically appeal those and say, we disagree with this. When they do that, they pay their taxes at the time, but then they submit the appeal with it. When they do that, the county does not in turn give that money to us. They hold on to it because they're not sure if they're going to have to give some of it back to the taxpayer or if they're going to not grant the appeal and in turn send the money to us. So there is money sitting in protest right now. I don't have the dollar amount. That I would have to ask Julia for that. She has that report. We could certainly get it for you to see how much is currently sitting in protested. But it doesn't get released to us until the appeal is completed. So just another kind of side on that, this is the lowest tax collections that we've seen since 2013. Back during about the 5 years of the recession, tax collections were sitting about 95%. They've always been 98 or higher since that point on. So now this year to get the 97.92%, it's a significant decrease. And we're not sure how that trend is gonna look going forward, if people are gonna keep arguing that their property taxes are high, or if it's gonna level out since property tax valuations have leveled out. Last meeting, we talked about budget versus actual. We budget a certain dollar amount, but when it comes to actual spend, that is a different number. So we did close out the year for fiscal year '24, and our budget versus actual came in the positive. You'll see there the red line is kind of our zero indicator for fiscal year '24, which ended June 30th. We actually were able to contribute some money back into the interlocal, which was a huge deal for us. Overall, K-12 was in the black by $473,000. And when I say K-12, I'm talking about the general fund. So both the elementary and the high school general fund together came in at $473 to the good. So that's how much money we were able to put back into the interlocal agreement. Elementary, standing alone, was in the red by $586,000. So we're still seeing a significant deficit in the elementary spend. High school was in the black by $1.059 million. So they helped us be able to put some money aside into the interlocal. Over the last 4 years, just so you kind of get an idea of what this graph means in real numbers, in the last 4 years, we've had to take nearly $2 million from the interlocal to subsidize the elementary general fund, and we've had to take $778,000 out to subsidize the high school. So the budget deficit and all the work we did was very real. It very much affected budget versus actual. You'll see on the next slide, we'll talk a little bit here about the structural imbalance. You can see here elementary is going to be in the dark blue and then high school is in the gray. This is what we're looking at for 2025. High school is looking good. They're nearly zero in the budget. Elementary is losing ground. We talked a little bit about that last time. We've just had some more expenses come up that we have to do. And we just need to keep an eye on that and hopefully get it righted in the right direction. A lot of conversations and actions are going to have to take place in order for that to happen, and a lot of it's at a level above this one. Yeah.
Yeah, thanks. I'm just curious, does the interlocal agreement process, does that allow us to stay pretty stable in our budget?
Yeah, it helps subsidize funds that happen to go negative. We'll often have negative amounts in other funds if we don't get taxes in by the end of the month. Maybe the payment comes in 2 days after the end of the month. So that helps stabilize other funds for the end of the year. For the majority, it subsidizes the general fund, though.
Thanks.
So just some future considerations to kind of have on your mind as we look at the next school year and look at the next couple years. Some other items that are going to affect taxes, either positively or negatively. The first is the general fund, so that's always a consideration. We always look at what our A and B is come October, and we start making projections on whether or not we think we can ask voters to approve additional money in the general fund. So that's one that's annually on our radar. Building reserves has a building reserve maintenance levy that is going to be expiring. So this is the final year of the levy. The building reserve maintenance levies are 6 years in duration, and they're $2 million a year. And these are the dollars that we use to paint our walls and change our floors and fix a boiler and a leaky toilet. So they're really important to the upkeep and maintenance of the district. So we'll have to discuss whether or not we want to ask the voters for an additional building reserve in the elementary this upcoming election for next year. The debt service, so this is our bond issues. The debt service in the high school has 2 bonds that each have 2 years remaining. And each year, it's a $2.8 million in taxes that taxpayers pay. So after 2 years, those will come off of the taxes. So that will be a big decrease in what we're asking taxpayers for on an annual basis or what they've already approved. So that'll just be a nice offset that if we have other things we need to look at implementing, that would probably be a good time to look at doing that. And then technology. We touched a little bit on the restrictions of the Elementary Technology Fund. Because it was a levy passed prior to 2013, it has more restrictions on it. So when we look at the cost of technology, like I said, there's a lot more expenses than just things. Network and security, those are really expensive and really, really important. So another option to look at would be to change the elementary technology levy. We would lose the permanent 3 mills, but if we asked taxpayers for a new elementary 3 mills, it would be tax neutral, but then we would have less restrictions because it's past 2013 and there's a new set of state laws that for what you can spend that money on.
If that revised technology levy were to fail, we are without technology funds, or is it reverts back to the previous?
We would keep the permanent.
Okay.
So just some items to kind of keep in your back pocket. Oh, sorry, Gary, go ahead.
I'm curious, on some of the technology things, does the safety levy apply in any of those?
I don't know.
I mean, it's not currently and not contemplated. I suppose you could draw some parallels from technology to safety, but generally speaking, they're divided in different buckets.
I think it did say in the safety levy you could pay for like cameras, security type things. But right now, we're using the safety levy totally to pay for staff. Any other questions on the adopted budget recommendations before I move on to taxable value?
Sandy.
I just want to thank you for that last slide, because I always like to know, like, what we're thinking about going forward, you know, based on what's happening right now. So thank you for that. Thanks for everything you've said so far. I can't wait for the next one.
Okay, so we're gonna talk about the taxable value that we received in the mail on August 5th. I have to be honest, I opened up the email with the taxable value for the upcoming year, and I did the math, and then I did it again, and then I did it one more time, and then I sent it to Mike, and I asked him to do the math, because we were both surprised at what happened. So in the Bozeman Elementary, taxable value went from $357,000 last year to $357 million, excuse me, to $351 million this year. And in Bozeman High School, it decreased from $433 million down to $428 million. So that's a 1.6% decrease in elementary and 1.25% decrease in high school. Now, this is a non-reappraisal year. So typically when we anticipate and build a budget, when it's a non-reappraisal year, we use 2% increase for taxable value. And we do that solely based on new construction. Because Bozeman is a growing community and we expect to see that on the taxable value information. This year, we were being very conservative because of all the protested taxes and how much it went up this last year. We opted to use 0% as the increase when we estimated the budget and did all of the projections. So when we saw it coming in negative, it was very interesting and not expected. I did immediately email the Department of Revenue to see if they could clarify and help me understand why that looked that way, and I didn't hear anything back prior to having to actually build a budget. So we continued as is. What you'll see here is just a graph that shows with a little bit more of a spike for last year. This is the percentages for the property value or for the taxable value growth. You can see that we see an increase every other year, or every year. Every other year is usually more than the previous because of those reappraisal years that happen. The last time we saw a decrease was 2016, and that's kind of, it's very different than it is now. That was when we did reappraisal years every 7 years. So that 2016 was looking back on 7 years prior. So that was looking back on homes and values during the recession. And so it was explainable as to why it decreased like that. But you can see since then, even though we use 2% for projections on the non-reappraisal years, it still typically comes in a little bit higher than that. When we are looking at the levies for what we need to have to make our budget balance, this is what we're using. You can see the current year and the budgeted funds on the left. The current year is what we are currently levying and the mills associated with that. Next year, proposed 25 is the dollar amount that we need to levy, and those are the proposed mills to go along with that. What we're asking you to look at today is the change in dollars. So the majority of our levies are not based on mills, they're based on flat dollar amounts. So that to us is very important, that we are able to adopt a budget, that we're gonna have the spending authority to be able to pay all of our bills, and that we have the correct amount of revenue coming in to cover those. So overall, we're looking at a $1.1 million increase in flat dollars. This one is what the taxes are based on the value of a $100,000 home. We show this one every year. The important thing to remember is that's an easy way to find your value, multiply it. This year, we're looking at a $6.28 per $100,000 increase with the presented taxable value. You can see in this slide the reappraisal years and the non-reappraisal years. Usually the reappraisal year, it comes down a little bit because our tax base grows, and then it maintains for the next year, and then it drops a little bit more. So you can see that fiscal year '25 is a non-reappraisal year based off of that trend. So ultimately, sorry, going back to that, ultimately, if you have $1 million home, based on the presented taxable value, you would see a rough increase of $62 a year in taxes. So that's what was presented as the taxable value. Now we're gonna get a little bit more into what the discussion has been over the last 4 days in regards to taxable value, and it makes things a little clunky. But bear with me, and we'll try and answer all of your questions as we go through this. Here's what we received from the city at 4 o'clock on Thursday afternoon. I believe it was attached in the board packet for you all to review prior to this meeting. But basically, the highlights of it is the Department of Revenue recognizes that the decrease in taxable value in Gallatin County is not correct. And so they let us know that there was errors. The errors were from the 2023 reappraisal when everything jumped 55%. They had some condominium reallocations that it sounds like they overvalued, and they had to get reappraised, lessening their taxable value. And then there was an economic condition factor that they noted, and that means that basically the values were based on the price of houses, that were the values of homes in specific neighborhoods were selling, and they were selling for less than what the reappraisal had appraised them at. So they had to go back through and recalculate those assessed values. They also noted that the last 10 months they've been dealing with the protested taxes. So they had over 3,700 homeowners protest their taxes, homeowners and business owners protest their taxes. And that's taken them 10 months to sort through all of those protests. And therefore, it did not leave them with much time to work through all of the new construction. And the new construction around Bozeman is not an overnight appraisal. It takes a lot of time. There's a lot of construction. So basically, the Department of Revenue letter said, yes, we realize this is wrong. This is what happened. And we got that on Thursday, and ever since then, it's been a whirlwind of talking to the right people, seeing how we can collaborate and work as a team to rectify it, because we know it's something that does need to get fixed. And we want to help as much as possible along the way, and we want to make sure that we're just transparent with taxpayers so that they know what's going on. So, with that being said, this is what the newly taxable property has looked like over the years. So we keep track when our taxable value statements come in, it tells us what amount of the taxable value is new construction for that year. So we've kept track of it over time. This year you can see it was just above 1%. It was, I believe, 1.1 and 1.2% in the elementary and high school respectively. This is the lowest it's ever been. 2012, it looks low, but it wasn't quite to the 1.1%. I went clear back to 2009 when we were receiving those numbers and seeing those dollar amounts of newly taxable property, and it's never been documented that it's been as low as it showed on this year's reports. So it's a bit of an anomaly this year. I also did want to add that it's an anomaly dating back all the way to 2009, but it's also an anomaly because we're the 36th largest growing county in the U.S., and that was from some 2023 data. So it's just a red flag. What I did is I did an estimate. So this is a trend estimate as to those numbers that we've been receiving for the newly taxable property. I plugged in to see if trend was accurate, where we would have been sitting this year with accurate numbers. So what we see this year is, I took the 10-year average is how I calculated it. The 10-year average was 4%. And with that 4%, elementary was spot on at 4%. High school was just slightly higher at 4.2%. But I thought that that was an interesting way to look at it as to what we maybe should have expected to see Obviously, it's an estimate, but I think it's a fairly better estimate than what we're currently looking at. If we had received the same growth in newly taxable property this year as we have in the past, so if we saw that 4% increase trend, instead of seeing negative taxable value numbers, we would actually see positive. So I plugged Bozeman Elementary in, we would see about a 1.17% increase in total taxable value, and high school would be 1.62%. That's an increase from what we're currently sitting at, of nearing 3% in both the elementary and in the high school. So what does that mean? That means that when we look at the $100,000 assessed value on a home, it decreases the amount of money taxpayers would pay because it's not the taxing jurisdiction grows because there's more people to tax. So we're still levying the same dollar amount, but we're spreading it out over more people. So when you look at the estimates from 2025 compared to fiscal year 24, you can see that it's a slightly less of an increase than it would be if we tax based off of the proposed taxable value. Does that make sense? And this is just a comparison, so you can see everything side by side. So on the left, we have fiscal year, that's current. And then as we go to the right, it's a few different scenarios. So fiscal year 25 is as presented, that's showing the actual taxable value decrease, the number of mills we would need to levy, and then the cost per $100,000 home per year. Fiscal year 25, 0% increase is what we based our initial budget projections on. And then if we recalculated it with the roughly 4% in newly taxable property, you would be looking at $190.01 per $100,000 of taxable value. And then just looking at some important dates. August 5th is when we receive the taxable value. I already spoke to that a little bit. It's a really quick turnaround to plug those numbers in and adopt a budget and make sure everything is accurate. That's the same day that things looked a little wonky, and so we emailed the Department of Revenue asking for some clarification. Thursday, August 16th, is when the City of Bozeman received the letter from the Department of Revenue, and they directed the commissioners that there was errors in the taxable value. Tonight, we're asking that the Board of Trustees adopt the proposed budget because we do need to get the ball rolling, and we have 5 days from August 20th to get it into motion and adopted by state law. Looking forward is in the light blue. So tomorrow, August 20th, the Department of Revenue is having a meeting in Belgrade with all local taxing jurisdictions. There's been a lot of conversations between cities and counties and school districts within Gallatin County, and then there's also been conversations with the Department of Revenue and the interim committee. So people are aware of this. People are proactively looking to work together to find a solution on how to best handle this and how to correct it so that everybody can be transparent and fair with their taxpayers. So I don't know exactly what that meeting looks like tomorrow, but it is happening in Belgrade tomorrow. Let's see, September 5th. Oh, Gary.
Thanks. Do you know what time the meeting is and where it's at?
It's at 3 o'clock and it's at the City of Belgrade, I believe. I can get you the address if you're interested.
And then is the information you got from the Department of Revenue, is that final or could it change?
I would say that's the point of the meeting. They've, to this point, have communicated that errors have been made and that they didn't get to all the new construction. They need to work through that process. We have had preliminary conversations with leadership at the Department of Revenue. They've acknowledged the errors and they want to work with us on solutions. I think the devil's in the details on solutions in terms of timelines. Their challenges are related to recruitment and retention of appraisers in Gallatin County. And so it's a manpower issue. And so we have proposed a variety of ideas. For example, taxes come out twice a year, and if they are incorrect or partially correct this time, making up those errors later in the year, so that by the end of the year, everything is right and things are made whole. Lacey's clearly articulated the impacts to local school districts, the impacts to cities and counties where a lot of their revenue is based upon mills. They're going to see decreased revenue rolling into the counties and the cities, which has implications for their staffing, recruitment, and retention. So we don't have any hard, fast answers. Tomorrow begins that conversation. Those entities that we have talked about have sent a letter to the Department of Revenue saying, we received your letter and we'd like you to fix it. And then we begin those conversations tomorrow.
Thanks, Casey. So after that, September 5th, that is when state law states that county commissioners are to fix and levy on all taxable values within the districts. John Nielsen is our county superintendent, and he's required to fix the mills and levies for our school. So he is in communication with us, he understands what's going on, and he's making sure the right people are involved so that we have the right tax rates on, or tax amounts for our taxpayers. October, as you know, is when property bills are mailed, and then November 30th, or within 30 days of a postmarked tax notice, is when the first half of property taxes are due. And then May is when the second half are due. And I think that's important to Casey's point, is how the timeline looks for corrections. October is a short turnaround. Maybe it's doable, I don't know. But May, this last year, taxpayers got a tax bill, a tax love note, as Mike likes to call it, in the mail just before their May tax payment was due. Maybe that would be an option for corrections being made. So ultimately today, we do have some recommendations, and these come right out of the board packet. Our recommendations are to approve the budgets and the tax dollar or tax levy dollar amounts and not set the mills. We'd like to work with the Department of Revenue and other local taxing jurisdictions to recertify taxable value with the corrected information. And we are willing and want to help support the county superintendent with the total mill calculation if and when that comes to fruition. So I'd love to take any questions if you guys have anything else you'd like to add or ask.
Sandy?
Who is going to be responsible for letting taxpayers help them understand this, so that they can understand it as much as they can? Is it on us? Are we a part of that puzzle, as part of the solution?
I would say we are part of that puzzle. So
Okay.
in the last couple days, Lacey and Mike and myself have been working on draft press releases. Those went out today from some of the entities. We wanted to have this conversation with trustees. Ours will go out in the morning. It's the same press release from all entities. It's written in a way to inform taxpayers about this error and the repercussions of the error, and our intent to work with the Department of Revenue to fix the error. In addition to that, it just so happened that the Revenue Interim Committee was meeting in Helena last week, which aligned with this. So Mr. Waterman made public comment at the Revenue Interim Committee, so the legislators are aware of this challenge. When Mr. Waterman also gave the Department of Revenue a heads up that he was going to testify, and so we heard from, I don't know what the job title, but the director of the Department of Revenue called us that day and again reiterated his desire to make it right, but was also drawing attention to their manpower issues and didn't have a timeline at that point on when new construction would be accounted for.
If I can just add, I think through their letter and through our discussions with the Director of Department of Revenue, I think they're aware that the mistake was on Department of Revenue's end, and that's all fine. We need to work with them as a team to get it fixed. To your question about whose role it is to get the information out, I think it's all of ours. I think it's the Bozeman school districts. I think Department of Revenue has a hand in that. Certainly the city, county, Belgrade School District, city of Belgrade, all of the affected tax jurisdictions have a responsibility to be transparent about all this. We talk a lot about that, and now's the time for it. So we just need to work together as a team with those other taxing jurisdictions, with the Department of Revenue to get it right. It's not finger pointing. It's nothing along those lines. We just need to fix it and move forward with it and do right by the taxpayers of the Bozeman School District and all of our taxing jurisdictions.
Gary?
Yeah, thanks, Mike. Do you know if the fix or correction of this will be retroactive and cover the full year? Or would it only cover the taxable, the 6 months taxable?
We know what Lacey told you. Everything that we know that's factual at this point is what Lacey said. There's meetings to discuss future plans going forward. I think we're interested in results. I think we're interested in making sure that the numbers are right at the end of the day, and our taxpayers are not taxed any more than they need to be, and for the right amount of property. How we get there, I think, is open for discussion and going to take a little bit of give and take on both all of our taxing jurisdictions' perspective, the Department of Revenue, and perhaps even our taxpayers if there's a delay in getting things right. But our goal is to see things through and make sure that they're being done right. And I think that's everyone's goal, not just ours.
Kevin?
Lacey or Mike, if you guys know, but my understanding, or clarify my point, your appraisal date is always January 1st of that year. So they look at the properties as of January 1st, 2024 for this upcoming cycle. Is that what you guys understand?
Beat you. Yes.
Okay, so it's not like a random, hey, over the whole year, now we're gonna appraise this. That building is not as of today. That's as of what was on that building right there as of January 1st, 2024. So all the same dates.
So the tax reappraisal cycle, and Mike, correct me if I'm wrong, the reappraisal cycle that we're on last year and this year was based on January 1, 2022 valuations. The 2024 valuations will be fiscal year 26 and 27.
Right, but the new construction is always based on the first of the year as
Yes,
well. So
yes.
that building across the street is where it was on January 1, 2024 for this whole process. So everything that's coming on new goes back to the beginning of this
Correct,
year.
yes.
Okay.
I listened to the whole presentation and I feel kind of silly asking this question, but I'm going to ask it. So the new construction that's come online in 2024 as taxable, as properties that are taxable, as it is right now, if it doesn't get fixed, is another way of saying it is that they had the year off from paying taxes? Did they not pay property taxes?
I think so, but that's a question that we're, candidly unclear about it. And it also looks like they were able to catch some of the newly constructed property, but not all of it. So it's not one size fits all, but that's my understanding, although we do need additional clarification on that point.
So Greg, I can probably help out on that by going through some of this within my own job. So if you, for instance, in a subdivision, you plat that in June, that plat might, until the next year, the next cycle, the individual lots aren't taxed until that next year, and that's when you get billed. So technically, and so in this scenario, yes, those properties, they're not being taxed, they're being taxed at their old value. So whatever their old state was as of, let's say 2000, it gets confusing because we're talking about so many different years, but in this scenario, when the appraisal cycle happened, when we went up 54% roughly, that's the value that property would be taxed at. So if that building was vacant or the old 4Bs, then that taxable value was $2 million. This upcoming year, because they haven't done anything with it, it's still $2 million.
Thanks. Sandy?
Is there, a talking points, like I maybe should be looking at Mike, that we could get our hands on as trustees to say this, and this, and the idea of us all working together for a solution, so that we could have just talking points that the lay, and I consider myself kind of a layman, and this is new territory for me. Would that be possible?
Yes, so the press release is intended to do that. So
Okay,
it,
okay.
Mr. Waterman helped write the first part of it, and it was very technical. And then some of the communications experts from the city and county turned that language into more understandable language. And so it's a 4-paragraph press release. It's not real long. I'll share that with all trustees.
That'd be great. Thank you.
So fingers crossed at this point is where we're at.
Fingers crossed, and I think the board has a role in, advocating for it more than I don't think this is something we should just hope they get right, or I think this is something we need to insist on. But yeah, we have some work to do first.
Sandy?
So aside from understanding it to a level that we can communicate with the community, is there anything else that we need to be doing as a school board in order to assist in this process going forward?
I think it's too soon to tell.
Okay.
We've heard from the Department of Revenue, they want to work with us, and they want to work with the cities and counties. To our understanding, this is only impacting Gallatin County, so it's isolated to our area. And we'll keep you appraised of how the meetings go. I think we felt it was important, transparency-wise, that a press release does go out, and our community understands that taxable values that we all received right now are incorrect. I also think we need to, like as Mike mentioned, be realistic and compromise in the solutions. Based upon what I'm hearing about their staffing issues, I don't think it's going to happen by those October deadlines. I think it's going to take the entire year to remedy this. And so there are a lot of, just like school finance, there are a lot of deadlines in law about how all things need to happen. And this is one of those situations where we need to come up with a solution that's not going to line up perfectly with all those deadlines, because they've already missed the deadline.
And just one more, sorry. In addition to that, are they going to have to be working on reappraisals during this time too? Okay.
Yep, so January 1st, 2024 would have been the date for the reappraisals for
Right.
the upcoming 2 years.
Right, okay. Thank
Tanya?
you.
So I want to just be clear that my understanding based on this presentation and from what I'm hearing from you is you are recommending that we go ahead and approve the superintendent's budget recommendation for both elementary and high school while requesting that the Department of Revenue continue to work through these errors.
Yep, we're requesting that you approve the dollar amounts that we're going to levy and not the actual mills associated with that.
And that's because of the error,
Correct.
whereas normally we do mills.
It's not up to the school district to set the mills, it's up to the county superintendent, but we always have that included
We have
in our
always
information.
proposed what
And
they are.
we just want to be very clear with this item that we are not approving mills.
And I think technically in state law, your duty is to set the dollar amounts. And so we're doing everything we need to do as a school district this evening to adopt this budget. And then we have a great business department that usually has their mind wrapped around the mills associated with that. Because of that, we just start recommending you don't set those mills or approve those mills.
I'll add that I think it gives us a little bit more leverage if we don't set them also. If we leave that portion of it, the taxpayer impact and suspense, in anticipation of getting this resolved correctly, I think it gives us more leverage than if we were to do the math, finalize those calculations and turn those in as well.
Gary?
And I think the motion as written clarifies all that, what the plan is moving forward with this. So I would move that we approve the superintendent's recommendation of the 2024-2025 budget, high school budget, and associated tax levy amounts as presented in items 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5.
Second.
Motion made by trustee Lucine, seconded by trustee Reinhardt. Is there any public comment? Seeing none, all in favor? Motion passes 7-0.
You need a similar motion on the other side? Yep.
Would you like to make a motion for the elementary item?
I move we adopt the superintendent's recommendation for the elementary school budget as presented. In item 4.3.1.
Second.
Motion made by trustee Reinhardt, seconded by trustee Lucine. Is there any public comment? Seeing none, all in favor? Motion passes 6-0. Now we need to take a motion to add back item 3.2.1 that was pulled from consent.
I move we pull back 3.2.1 from consent.
So 3.2.1 was the minutes of our previous board meeting. What was left out was the approval of the amended first student contract. And so we've updated that, highlighted that in the updated agenda, and asked for your approval of those minutes.
We have a motion on the table and no second.
Second.
Motion made by trustee Wilson and seconded by trustee Black. Is there any public comment? Seeing none, all in favor? Motion passes to 7-0. Thank you. And up next is board discussion. Item 5.1, discuss recommended revisions to policy 1612, long-range strategic plan. Superintendent Bertram.
Thank you. Policy 1612, just verbatim, speaks to the verbiage in the long-range strategic plan. So as we went through the 23-24 revision process, have updated mission, vision, values, and goals, we are adjusting policy 1612 accordingly. This is not was not triggered by legislation or changes in law. It was triggered by our updates to our long-range strategic plan. So it'll take 2 readings. We'll bring it back on a consent agenda at a future meeting. For ease of editing, we just crossed out all the old stuff and added the new stuff.
Looks good, Casey.
Gary.
I just want to say, I like it. I like what we've done. I think it's dynamic, and we're considering what's happening now and trying to identify things in the future. And so I think it looks very good.
We've got 2 looks goods. Any further trustee discussion? Thank you. Up next is discuss 2023-24 school accreditation process results.
Mr. Van Buren, on number 5, if you just click on that, this, and if you wouldn't mind clicking through with me, it'd be great. So 23-24, Montana OPI proposed new accreditation standards for Montana's public schools that were approved by the Board of Public Ed that went into effect and impacted our school accreditation process for last school year. I wanted to walk you through that, share successes and challenges, and give you our final accreditation status for the year. The new accreditation requirements, you all have access to this. That link will take you to the lengthy reference guide, but that's the math equation that the new standards put in place. You have assurance standards plus performance standards. So assurance standards being those things in Chapter 55 and others, and then plus performance standards equals your overall category. Schools would receive a score on both sides. Assurance standards score, a performance standard score, and then an overall score. Small print there, but that is the rubrics checklist on all the assurance standards. You'll notice in the third column a variety of submission tools. That'll become important. So ISAP is Integrated Strategic Action Plan. And then you have accreditation platform. Infinite Campus appears on there. Infinite Campus is the statewide student information system. And when we get to successes and challenges, that will become clear. Over on the student performance side, you have student learning outcomes in math, learning outcomes in ELA, and then college and career readiness standards. We took the approach of not recreating the wheel. We didn't want state accreditation to be this once a year siloed workload for all involved. And so when we designed the long-range strategic plan revision process, we kept this integrated strategic action plan requirements in mind. Most notably, the need for a comprehensive needs assessment, survey data. So when we did the LRSP revisions, we put out a lot of surveys of our staff, community, and students. That link there will take you to the ISAP submission, which was just a lengthy document from the district level that very much mirrored all the things in the long-range strategic plan. What I'll say about it, it was very easy to write because we had already done the work. It was some cut and paste, putting that all together. Go ahead, Mike. There's a rubric associated with each part of this. You'll notice on the left that the categories are regular accreditation, regular with minor deficiencies, advise, and deficiency. And there's an elementary rubric and a middle school rubric, high school rubric. You end up with a final score on all of those. Go ahead. This is just how the rubric works out. If you look at that table, if you have regular accreditation for assurance standards, regular accreditation for performance standards, you end up with regular accreditation on the right-hand side overall. And then there's deviations from that. I'll give you the good news is all of our schools are on that top line. Regular on the insurance standards, regular on the student performance standards, and regular for final accreditation. Go ahead, Mike. OPI put out some information in July that of all Montana schools, 77% received regular accreditation, 82% for elementaries, 74% for middle schools, 64% for high schools. There was a lot of comparison made in those press releases and in the press talking about an increase in Montana's public schools being fully accredited, and then there was a lot of rebuttal from education agencies that it was an apples and oranges comparison, comparing one accreditation system to the other. I already gave you this good news. All BSD 7 schools received regular accreditation for assurance, for student performance, and for final accreditation. There's 11 assurance standards. BSD schools only received one, received point deductions in 2 areas. These were not surprises to us. These are things that we had worked through the HR department and through our uploads to the state. assignment and licensure of staff. So in challenging times with recruitment and retention, working through challenges of our staff waiting to get their licenses, our staff that didn't do what they needed to do to acquire those licenses. And so we have a handful of staff across the district that we received point deductions for. And then teacher load, class size. So setting classes above accreditation standards. As you know, when we talked about enrollment and sort of those airplane analogies, we have empty classrooms or hangars around the district, but most of our airplanes are very, very full. And so receive some point deductions there. That link will take you to the full report that gives you every single school and where the deviations came from. It's important to note those were the only point deductions in the entire process. So when you move over to the student performance side, we received all the points possible. Every other assurance standard, we received all points possible. If I zoom out and look at successes and challenges, the synergies with the LRSP revision process and the ISAP, we purposely designed those things to integrate well, and that was a success. That also, the new process, the site-based submission requirements are actually very, very minimal. So if you are an elementary or middle school, you're commenting on your strategic goals around reading and math. They're already doing that within our LRSP process, so there's a bit of cut and paste there. If you're at the high school, the only thing they reported on was college and career readiness pathways. I felt that the process did a better job of balancing those inputs and the outputs. So following the required inputs on the teacher licensure and class size and number of principals and number of counselors, but also taking into account how kids are doing and if student learning is happening. So I felt like it was a nice balanced, and then all of our schools were successful with regular accreditation. All of the challenges come from the automated aspects of the data uploads from Infinite Campus. They were very time intensive, way above and beyond what particularly two teams work on this, Pat and his team in HR, and then in the data world, Suzanne, George, and Lisa Sheehan, and David Swedman, and Damian Pittman. All of those offices and staff spent hours and hours and hours and hours trying to get this right, and experienced some frustrations where we would run reports. They would all show up that we were good to go, and then a week later you'd run the same report and we'd have errors. A large part of that, I believe, is due to the fact that we don't operate our student information system as Infinite Campus. So they're having to create this translation from PowerSchool into Infinite Campus. I think once they have those translation tools built, this will get easier as we move forward. But in year one, it was very challenging. What I can say is that the OPI staff were extremely helpful. They were extremely supportive. They were patient. But Pat was pulling his hair out to get through this process. At the end of the day, we feel like we have all the correct data uploaded. The point deviations that we took for unlicensed staff or for class sizes that were over are accurate. Pat, anything you want to add to that? No, okay.
Do we know if most other districts in Montana use Infinite Campus?
I think more districts use Infinite Campus than not. However, most of the large AA districts have a PowerSchool infrastructure, and so Montana OPI continues to support that and tries to make that translation work. That happens around every data collection. Because they were changing all of this, the prior year's tools no longer work, so they were literally building those tools while they were trying to fly the plane. Press your button.
Is your button green?
Oh, it's not plugged in. Use Mars's.
I think the one thing I'd want to share with the board is, not to have the perception that we're hiring non-licensed teachers. So there's lots of backstories behind that handful of teachers who were unable to get their license in time for the report. Everything from, and the one thing that we're learning as OPI went to their new licensing system, we have to be more vigilant, and our individual teachers that we have hired have to be more vigilant about constantly checking up on where are they at in the process. So, for example, there were several teachers who had everything done that they needed to have done, except for some reason when they went to the county and got their fingerprints, because OPI will not allow the district to send our fingerprints. There's this whole, I could go on a half an hour spree about why you can't share fingerprints, but it just is what it is. But anyway, like a teacher would go to the sheriff's department, get their fingerprints done, and have everything else turned in and think, I'm done. And then a month later, get, checked, because we stay on them constantly, like, hey, where's your license? Where's your license? And then they would contact OPI, and OPI would say, well, your fingerprints came back unreadable. And the problem is, and I'm not blaming OPI for this, but they don't have apparently the bandwidth or the system to notify people, to be proactive and say, hey, guess what? We've got everything but your fingerprints. So what we've learned is our teachers really have to stay on top of that process. And that was the reason for a lot of those folks not being licensed in time for the report, is just that they weren't aware that they thought they'd done everything that they needed to do, and they weren't aware of these little glitches like your fingerprints were smudged and couldn't be read. You have to do it over again.
Sandy?
So am I hearing that you're thinking that the challenges will not be as great next year because of they've built a system that's...
I am hopeful that those translation tools that they're building to work with PowerSchool and the glitches that we work through and the learning that our staff did and learning their staff did will make it more seamless for PowerSchool users next year. Is that, yeah, that's all of them, unless there's any other questions.
Are there any further questions? Thank you. Is there any public comment on non-agenda items? Mr. Matthews.
Oh yeah, I got lots to say.
Write down your name and address, sir.
Will do.
Please. And push the button so your mic is green when you're ready to talk, if you would. Okay, and then just talk loud.
All right.
Yeah.
Want me to write these down first?
Yeah, please. Yeah.
Still have a teacher voice.
Giving you two. You go over 2 minutes. It's gonna be a problem.
Oh, now mine's working.
Beautiful. All right. Do I need to say and spell my name too? I'm used to that.
I think we know who you are.
All right. First of all, I just wanted to thank you all for your commitment to Bozeman Public Schools, to our students, to our staff, across the board. You guys do an amazing job, all of you, and it's very much appreciated. And I am very excited to be working with you in my new capacity as the president of BEA this year. And I'm really looking forward to what we can all do together to help move us forward in all of our different capacities with all of our different hats. That was where I was going to stop, but I wanted to go back to our pension education part just for a second to add a little more perspective and add perhaps a little counterpoint to one of Dr. Waterman's, I like to call him that, comments, just for the ability to step back and look at the system as it is and where we are today compared to where we were and compared to where I think we should be. And it just is disheartening to me to hear that we're in a boardroom in a very solid public school education setting, and we're thinking about the dollars that we spend on pensions for any of our members in a way that is not going towards a pension, because that's the promise. That's what we have built in our society. I know the TRS pension has been around since 1937. They've been healthy. And many of you have been around long enough, whether it's in this district or somewhere else in education, and seen public education continue to get underfunded, and it's been paper cut by paper cut. And if I think about the years I've been on our insurance committee, and I look back to every time we would have a plan change, the benefit reduced, and we were saving those dollars. And it wasn't because we didn't want to provide good health care, it's because we made choices to put money in different places, and that was because we were not being funded appropriately, and we had to do what we had to do. And it feels to me like we're getting to a point where we are on the razor's edge of failure or not. And now that we're talking about the pensions that are here to build stability for all of our employees through their lifetime, that just disheartens me. And I know Mike is not on board with that personally. I just understand that it's a fiscal decision that in the situation we're in looks like an answer. And it breaks my heart that that is one of the answers we're looking at. And I hope that all of us are doing what we can to help solve the problem on the other end, so we don't continue to tear down what we have for benefits for our employees. And that's classified and certified, and I can put on my MFPE hat. If some of you aren't aware, I'm the vice president of the State Teachers Union. So I do in capacities represent our classified staff, and they deserve that as well. I would also add that a lot of people in those situations don't know what they don't know. And I've got highly educated friends that work at MSU that had to make the decision to They made the decision to go to a defined contribution plan, and we could go on and on about pensions. But that very good friend of mine who's highly educated very much regrets the fact that he is in a defined contribution plan because he didn't understand what the actual implications were. So I just would encourage us to, when we think about what we're doing for our employees here, we are doing the best we can, and we are working within the constraints we can. And I'm in a position where I can say things that perhaps some of you can't, and I will continue to do that as we move ahead, because we need to be funding education, and it's not you, it's our state, and we have a bit of a responsibility to be up there asking for it. And the state needs to hear from us the problems that we're having, instead of another paper cut and another paper cut and another paper cut. Thank you.
Thanks, Eric. Eric, congratulations on your election, and thanks for what you do for Bozeman's teachers. We appreciate you. Thank you. So. Anyone else back there behind the columns? Nope. Okay, then we will move on to executive cabinet reports.
Do you want me to start? Okay. I have a very brief update on K-5 enrollment for you. So at this time last year, our new enrollments were 569 students. And right now, as of this morning, our new enrollments stand at 514 students. I'm just talking K-5. We have 32 pending new enrollments, and the new enrollments for non-residents, that total turned out to be 9. And those 9 are included in the 514. I'm also very happy to report that we've been able to hire our coordinator, our person for our Welcome Center that we've talked to you about previously, and she's going to start being onboarded tomorrow. So that's very exciting for us.
Thank you, Mars. Mr. Strauss.
Yeah, I'd like to give you a hiring update. So good news from the hiring end. Michael's here. I know he came in and did an interview Friday with me. The numbers changed just a little bit even from when I did the interview, but we have successfully hired 53 new teachers for this school year. Unfortunately, Friday afternoon we lost 2, so I guess that means we're down to 51. We had a special ed teacher at the high school that made a career change, and then there was a speech pathologist that had kind of verbally accepted a position with Chad, but then over the weekend or prior to the weekend had decided with their spouse that because of the other work they were doing in the community that they couldn't really probably take on the 0.5. So 51 teachers hired, but we're hoping to get to 53. Really good news. I'll tell you, it was an exceptional hiring year for special ed. As I mentioned to the board, I think 2 meetings ago, we had 17 special ed teaching positions vacant, and we filled them all, which is just awesome. It's incredible. Through a variety of ways to fill those. Some of them, 3 of them were filled by internal candidates. We hired, I have to look at my notes here. I want to get it right. So 3 of them were hired with folks that were on 1-year-only contracts before. And then 12 were brand new to the district, and some others were transfers, so that's where it comes up to 17. Of those 12 that were new hired, 5 of them were made possible because of that ABC to Teach grant. So we actually have 5 brand new teachers who are currently enrolled and receiving that tuition reimbursement to do that, to get their, they have bachelor's degrees, but now they'll be certified in the state of Montana as special education teachers. So that's really good news. The other thing that's exciting is, a year ago we struggled to fill our world language positions at the middle schools. I'm happy to say that we'll be offering German and Spanish at both middle schools this year, so that's really good news. And we're also hiring, we didn't think we were going to be able to fill this position, but we're also hiring a local music person who is also going to be taking advantage of the ABC to Teach to get their K-8 certification. So overall, really good hiring season for all the vacancies we had. This might confuse you. We actually had 92 openings, but we hired 53 people. And the reason for that is a lot of movement within the district. So if Gary's a second grade teacher at Longfellow and we have a vacancy at Morning Star and he gets hired to move to Morning Star, now we also have a vacancy for Gary. So that's why we had 92 openings, but actually 53 vacancies.
Thank you, Pat. That's really great news. The 51 teachers were all people who were not in the district last year, just for clarification. Is that correct?
Yep, 50. So we keep track in my office of the folks that are returning teachers and the folks that are brand new. So 50, and as I say, now it's 51, but 53 were on paper Friday. Now it's down to 51.
Great job. That's a busy hiring season.
Yeah.
Thank you.
So I would just like to let the board know that last week we had our instructional cabinet retreat, and I know when you think of retreat, you think of the Wilson boardroom. That's where we had it. So anyway, so topics during that's a chance for us to bring all of our administrative team together, kind of go over some nuts and bolts on the upcoming school year, take care of some house cleaning, but we also take care of some high-level topics. And so some of the big topics that we covered was that LRSP 5-year plan, kind of going over that, so they had a good understanding of the direction that we're moving over the next 5 years. What does that look like with their LRSP implementation framework, their documents that they're working on, and then, and this is on Wednesday, then connecting the dots between teacher evaluation and the MTSS PLC process. And so Casey and Pat did some work around making that connection. So when we work with our principals during their evaluations that they're working with their teachers and connecting the dots of the work, the Danielson rubric that we already have in place to the PLC and the MTSS processes that we're putting in place. Then in the afternoon, Sarah Hayes, our new coach for our admin team around PLC and MTSS, did a great presentation of connecting her work and explain what she's going to be doing with them, and then connecting that to leadership and that it's really important. And I know that Superintendent Bertram has said it multiple times, the really success of a building lands on that building leadership. And so we're building their capacity moving forward. Then on Thursday, a lot of nuts and bolts on Thursdays, talking about special ed, talking about our analytics and insights, which is our unified insights. How are we going to be using that to track intervention across the district K-12 now that we have schedules, and personnel, and we have PLCs in place, that we have those foundations that we need to really start tracking is that work being effective and part of that piece of it. So we talked about the new masked test, so state test that's moving forward. A little bit about facilities, and then the afternoon, Jennifer Westfall, who is our new MLEL coordinator for the district, as well as being the Irving principal, did a great job of walking our instructional staff through the resources that we have for our teaching staff and for our admin staff to really connect with families in our district.
Thanks, Mike.
Yep.
I have a couple updates. First, all trustees should have the Anxious Generation book. We talked about that as attached to the LRSP Student Wellbeing placeholder. Mr. Van Vieren and Dr. King are working hard to put together a working group that's going to look at district data, end up building out that goal and building associated action plans. Trustee D is taken on and is willing to she's going to wear multiple hats as a K5, 6-8, and 9-12 parent. Having a student in each grade band is a great perspective, and that trustee hat as well as needed. Also PAC leadership hat. So it's going to be a small, nimble group with people wearing multiple hats. We're waiting on confirmation from representatives from Bozeman Health and possibly Billings Clinic. We have a health department person, city county health department on that group, and we'll keep you updated there. The other item I wanted to let you know about is Gallatin High School facilities update. As you know, the long-range facility plan prioritized the proceeds from the CJ Middle School lots to help fund some district projects, one being the parking challenge at Gallatin High School, and two being the ongoing concern around grass and the desire for turf. In the meantime, we've had Gallatin High boosters and parents very interested in that topic and beginning to move forward in a fundraising capacity. The LRFP made the recommendation that the district sit down with the city of Bozeman to see if the synergies at the sports park make sense and if we can establish a long-term MOU that would check a bunch of boxes, that would reduce overall cost to taxpayers, that would put some agreements in where we wouldn't have rental fees associated with that if we use district proceeds to help build out the sports park. I'm giving you an update that those conversations have been really positive, really fruitful. We've worked with district legal counsel and actually just today sent the city of Bozeman a draft MOU for consideration. They'll run that through their legal teams. In our preliminary conversations, which had representatives from the sports park facility, representatives from the city of Bozeman, and then our offices, we came to agreement and all of our asks were acknowledged, and I think we're moving forward in a really positive direction. The document I'm sending you is an update on that, and it's also a document that's going to be shared. We walked through it with Erica Schnee today. It will be shared with Gallatin boosters. We are asking the boosters and their fundraising to shift their focus across the street to the sports park. The dollars that we will be committing from the district, in essence, will purchase three things. It'll purchase a parking lot that the city will build. It would purchase one turf field, and it would purchase, in collaboration with the city, a safe crossing across Oak, somewhere in the middle of that intersection. Think like Kagi flashing beacons by the stadium. So the booster group has a desire to have 2 practice facilities and have lights, and so that would be the focus of the booster project, is to move it not on Gallatin campus, but move it to the sports park to help build out a potential second field and add lights. We feel like that partnership creates a lot of synergy, and that we are excited to move that forward. Whether that will be contingent upon the boosters raising the funds for the second field, but we are full steam ahead on the construction of the 3 items I talked about in terms of the preliminary conversations with the city of Bozeman. Next steps include when District administration and city administration are happy with the MOU, it will go to trustees for approval. It'll go to the city commission for approval. Once the MOU is solidified, then we'd begin the design process and planning process. Take any questions on that, and then I have one more quick item. Okay, final item, we are opening Bridger Charter Academy, or rebranding Bridger Charter Academy as one of the new charter schools in Montana. If you recall the last board luncheon at Bridger Charter, you heard from those very thoughtful students in the room about what Bridger is and perceptions of Bridger and what are some of the barriers for students enrolling at Bridger, hanging on to past preconceived notions that it's an alternative school or it's for a certain type of student. So we use some superintendent budget to help bring in a videographer to capture some of those great student voices before they left our building. And it resulted in about a 4 or 5 minute video that's going to be on the website. I wanted you guys to have the first glimpse of it.
BCA students are typically very creative people who are outside of the box thinkers, which is really cool to see. And there's such a wide variety of different personalities and interests. It's kind of like having a little bit of everything. And the BCA students are typically very creative people who are outside of the box thinkers, which is really cool to see. And there's such a wide variety of different personalities and interests. It's kind of like having a little bit of everything. And I feel like they're also more open to growth and to learn more about stuff that they might not agree with.
I really love the Bridger community. It's very welcoming. When I first transferred here, I was super nervous, and I don't know, I was not having it. And when I transferred, just all the teachers and the students, they made me feel very welcomed, and it's a very safe community, and I really appreciate that about it.
One thing that makes Bridger different than the normal high schools is like how small the classes are and how connected you are with everybody. Like all the other students, the teachers, like I feel like I have a really good relationship with like everybody I interact with at school.
To be a Bridger student is really just to feel very supported, because there's just so many kids, like you can't really connect with each individual student the way you can in Bridger.
BCA is a really strong community, so I feel like you kind of have to be community-minded and like willing to not always put yourself first and like do things not just for the benefit of yourself but for the benefit of the community. But also it's like a really supportive community, and like if you are behind, people aren't gonna like shame you and be like, why are you behind? They're gonna be like, how can I help you catch up?
The BCA community and culture is just a bunch of like kind, genuine humans who are just there to support you academically and just like emotionally and make life in school just not easier, but more like capable for your mental state at the moment and just like how you're doing in life.
Being a student in Bridger feels very supported. The first day I tried it, it made me feel very happy and very like in a place where I finally belonged almost. And that's a very good feeling.
You could have this model where teachers can actually focus on the students a lot more. Instead of having 30 students per class, you have around 15, and in some classes even less. And so it allows for the teacher to much more focus on students individually, but it also gives students room for us to individually focus on our own learning. Whereas in those larger classrooms, you kind of have to do it as like the collective.
Bridger is very important to have as an option for every student, because school is difficult, like everyone struggles with it. If you have a 4.0 or a 1.0, everyone struggles. So I'd say the ability to get more support that you will be able to have for years to come is very, very important.
I think I learn better with the BCA community, just because it's more independent and one-on-one. That gives me more motivation to want to learn instead of just like feeling in the corner, I guess, because I feel like a lot of people feel that way when they're in bigger classrooms.
I don't think I could get through school without it, honestly. I have a lot of difficulties in school, and sometimes I just need a little extra help. And the Bridger teachers are so kind about that and help you so much through that, which benefits me so much. And without that, I don't know if I could pass through other schooling.
I don't really know how far I would get in high school if I wasn't in Bridger.
The part I'm like most proud of is like the interpersonal relationships I've developed with a lot of the students and teachers in BCA. It feels very welcoming to come to school.
Bridger has helped me with building connections and keeping those connections with communication.
One thing that Bridger is helping with for like after high school is definitely self-advocacy. I'm not great at it, but with Bridger, I feel like I can better ask questions and I can better like receive help, which eventually leads to me being more confident about asking for things and asking for help, which is a good life skill.
After high school, I want to major in pre-vet and minor in business, and then go to college to become a veterinarian.
Honestly, I have no idea what I want to do after high school, but I know that whatever I pick, Bridger will have helped me with all the tools that I need to get there, because not only is it reinforced that you do need to do your work, but it's not over reinforced so that it's personal decision. So whether you do it or don't do it, it's a personal decision and it only impacts you. It doesn't impact other people. So, and that's how it is in the real world. So I think that that will be very helpful in my life after high school.
I will be the first ever high school graduate in my family, and I will be the first ever college attendant in my family. And I want to double major in computer science and fine arts.
Those are all the EC reports.
Lab chills. Thank you. Are there any Board of Trustee reports? There will be, okay, go ahead, sorry. Gary?
Sorry. We'll just update you on the meeting project. It's a very interesting process for me and others kind of involved in it. Since our last meeting, I've gotten Janice Case from NCEE, National Council on Education and Economy. She will be attending the meeting and be a co-facilitator and will present information to the attendees about what it takes to establish a high-functioning system of education. And we're in the process of putting together a document that I'm hoping to send out next week to everybody with more detail on the agenda and what's going to be presented, and so people have more detail. I'm starting to get some responses from some of the entities about attendees. I'm trying to get a good sense of who will be attending by the first part of September, because the meeting is October 2nd and 3rd. And I may need some help contacting different schools around the region. So if you're interested in finding that out and helping out, I'd appreciate that. And but I've decided I'm going to have the meeting anyway, and but it's shaping up pretty good. The most interesting thing I've learned as I talk to people, I may have mentioned this before, is asking different educators and association leaders, if they could describe for me what our system of education is. And I'm not getting any response other than, I'm not sure. Let me think about it. I'll get back to you, which nobody has yet. But so it's just interesting about learning about the importance of understanding our system of education. And the one thing that's developing very clearly is the process under which education topics are discussed is critical, and we're learning that. Diane Groves is doing a great job researching and trying to learn as much as possible about how to structure the meeting. So I think it's going to be really good, and hoping to have 80 people there, but whoever shows up is going to learn a lot and contribute. So if you're interested in learning more and see if you can help out, let me know. Thanks.
Thanks, Gary. There will be no second meeting in August, so you all know.
Next time, turn your mic off.
Oh, sorry.